If you are working in front of a crowd that's not reacting to anything, what should you do? Should you try to change things up to try to get a reaction out of them? Should you just sometimes chalk it up to there's nothing that could be done to get the crowd going? Is there always something that could be done to change things up and get the crowd going? What do you do if you're in
N-
that situation?
Well, there's no rule of thumb because every situation is different. It depends on the spot you are on the card, who you're working with, what the issue is or may not be, what the issue is may or may not be with the crowd as far as why they're not liking it. Do they just not like you, or do they? We've I've had everything happen. I've had where they just didn't give a fuck to see anybody, and there's not a lot you can do, but you don't go out of your mind and pull out fucking switchblades and chainsaws. We've had the situations with the Midnight Express and the Dynamic Dudes where they just hated them so bad, even they were the baby faces. It turns the reaction, but you're getting some reaction. Remember, I've talked about that time that we had the bunkhouse stampede in Nassau Coliseum, and it wasn't an active crowd. They didn't really know anybody. It wasn't a good card. Remember, I've talked about how, with the exception of the War Games, the rest of the card was the shits. It was the time they fucked the time up on the advertising, so people came in like hours late.
Oh my God.
Um, it was a mess, and there wasn't any that there was Bobby Eaton and Nikita Koloff trying to have a fucking match, but yeah, sometimes it just ain't gonna happen. Sometimes in the territory days or in the days when you weren't on pay-per-view with a specific time to hit or live television or whatever, you could determine some towns they didn't want to see the babyface shine. Harlan, Kentucky was like that. Rock and Roll Express could be just kicking ass, whoever they were against, and just doing all their shit. And anywhere else, the people be going, yay, and the people in Harlem, eh. But as soon as the fucking heels would cut them off and start getting the heat, then the people would get into the match. They weren't happy to see it. They were yelling and cussing at the heels. And that's what there were certain towns that wanted to be mad. They didn't react as much to the babyface shine, but once you cut them off and started getting heat, that's where they got into it. They didn't know they wanted to be mad, but they responded to the heat. So you stretched the heat out. And then a big comeback at the end, they would blow for the fucking babyface. And other places, they might not like a wrestling match, so you have to get a little wilder to fucking get them into it, or whatever. But there's no way to tell anybody here's what you can do in any situation. I mean, because then you might not be allowed in this fucking environment in AEW. I guess everybody's allowed to do everything, but in normal wrestling businesses, you wouldn't have been allowed to just say, okay, well, I ain't buying this, so let me get some color and we'll go out and fucking throw the tables around. If you're in the third match, so there's always, sometimes guys wouldn't get a reaction. They were green. They were concentrating on their match. They wouldn't remember to bring the people into it. They wouldn't look at them or gesture to them or acknowledge their response, whether good or bad, positive or negative. They'd just be boring in doing their match. And that, especially if they're not familiar with you, that ain't going to help. So the veterans would always say, bring the people in it. If you can't get the goddamn whole crowd up, find the old woman with the big ass or the fucking ridiculously old looking man with a cane and he looks so frail, but he'll shake it at you at ringside, or some woman with a fucking weird haircut or anything, and start picking on them. And if you can get them, then the other people get involved in it. But you can't do that on television. And and none of that would work if you goddamn were on a show where everybody was just running people down with goddamn Zambonis. Then how do you stand out?
If the crowd is that quiet, does it help or hurt to have the house lights that bright?
It definitely hurts because people are more. I mean, they make noise in all environments and they're used to the lights being up these days. So they're still going to cheer, but you've always noticed in the territory days when you went to different buildings with different lighting setups, because back then they were whatever lights the arena had. It wasn't like your traveling fucking wrestling setup. If the building was lit up, they were less likely to throw shit, to cuss, to flip you off, to fucking get rowdy. The darker it was, the more like they felt they were part of the crowd, but they wouldn't be seen or they wouldn't stand out. They were more comfortable. The spotlight wasn't on them. And that was up to and including if you were in a dark building, you had a better chance of getting jumped on the way back from the ring because they thought they could get away with it. It was in the dark. Everybody wasn't seeing them. And sometimes buildings would make that adjustment when they had a lot of trouble with fans jumping in the ring or guys getting stabbed or whatever the fuck. They would bring the house lights up sometime for the main events or the more important matches. Or like in Knoxville at Civic Coliseum, since they had really concentrated ring lights at the Coliseum that, were part of the Coliseum lighting thing. They just hung over the ring, but you couldn't see dick outside. And we had them do this. When guys would just fight outside around ringside, they would turn the house lights on. So that way everybody in the building could see them, but also we'd make sure they kept them up for the entrances and exits so that nobody could take a fucking poke at you in the dark and then run off.
Well, they didn't have to worry about that here at this pay-per-view.
No, they did. They had to worry about them running off. If they'd have opened the fucking arena doors, I bet you they would have lost part of the crowd by now.
Is this what happens when you give away tickets with cheeseburgers?
I think the cheeseburgers might have set better on their stomachs than this show. I think they were getting sour belches from this. All right.